Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Professor Katarina Popovic. You are professor at the University of Belgrade in Serbia, but also the Secretary General of ICAE. It's the International Council for Adult Education. Maybe it's interesting to hear a little bit what are the activities of this council.
Mm-hmm. Well, hello, everyone. Let me first start saying thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, for having me on today with you and giving me opportunity to tell you a bit more about Paulo Freire today and where we see his importance in a modern education, but also at the beginning sharing a few words about me and my organization. Well, as you said, I'm professor for adult education. Well, we still call it andragogy at the University of Belgrade. But my work in a civil society is mostly through the International Council for Adult Education, and we prefer to use abbreviation ICAE. It's much easier. Well, not to be mixed with IKEA, of course. We would like to be as popular, but we are not yet. And that's the global network of organizations that work in adult education, lifelong learning, non-formal learning, and so on. Most of them are civil society groups, organizations, and networks. There are a few others, like universities and so on, but mostly we are a voice. We like to say that we are a voice of adult education, lifelong learning, the global voice. So it's a network with, more than 100 members, and we have members around the globe in all the world's region. When I say region, I mean it as UNESCO defined the regions. Means we have members and we are present in Latin America, Africa, Asia, Europe, North America, Africa, everywhere.
So you are the right person to have an overview of adult education and the link with civil society also, I guess.
I hope so. Yeah. I hope so. I do have an insight through the work of our members. I do have an insight on what's going on around the globe.
Wonderful. What we would like to know of all our interviewees is this personal link with Paulo Freire. No? How did you get acquainted with his legacy or his work?
Well, even during my study, and I have to say in Serbia, you can study andragogy or adult education as a bachelor study, 4 years, which is not the case in many other countries. And even during my study, I've learned about Paulo Freire and pedagogy of the oppressed. And of course, the whole history of this region, and that was the socialist and communist Yugoslavia. Then we had a civil war and changes. We live in a quite different world today. We are in Europe, but it's not EU. Yugoslavia used to be one of the leaders of non-aligned movement. So, the country where I lived and all the transformation the country went through made me thinking about, the global world, justice, injustice, political system, changes of the political system, and the role education has in those changes. So I started during my study being interested in Paulo Freire, also as an adult educator, so as a scholar or researcher. But then also through my work in a civil society, I realized that the potential is huge of application of his ideas and what he did in Brazil, that we can learn a lot about education and its power in changing society in different types of political systems, not only in the countries like Brazil. So, and of course, through work of the members of ICAE, I realized that there are a lot of practices based on his ideas. So this interest is continuous, of course.
Okay.
From both theoretical and practical.
And practical also. That makes it very interesting. And that's why we would like to have this quest on the question if Paulo Freire or his legacy is still relevant for today, Europe especially, and are the paradigmas or the angles he was using in his pedagogy, but also his philosophy, are they relevant? And which are the points of his thoughts that we could use today?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you check the literature on Paulo Freire, you could see that he's still very much read, interpreted, used, but especially in academia, in scholarly work. There are plenty of books and articles and study and analysis on his idea. So his legacy is very alive there. There are, especially in Europe, there are many institutes or research centers that carry his name. But if you check closely, then you will see that that's not exactly the case in the practice of education, adult education, lifelong learning. And my thesis would be that Europe has takes care of the legacy of Paulo Freire and uses it quite a lot, but mostly in academia and mostly in our scholarly work. Mm-hmm. But in the practice, what we call today civic education or political education or critical literacy, I don't think we are following many of his paradigms. And one of the reasons might be that we read it too literally, so, we think that's what he applied in Brazil. That was, Pedagogy of Oppressed, his famous book, the Bible of adult educators and critical literacy. Well, but that was, the theory of oppressed, those who are oppressed and those who are oppressing. That refers to the Brazil in that time. And we live in different times and in different countries. So it's still interesting to analyze, but not very much to use. And I would say that's not the case.
And should we have another interpretation of these words? I mean, the oppressed of that time, maybe they are still oppressed, but in the case of Europe, is it a matter of making another choice of words and terms? Because we live in a certain economic system, dominant system, and education is still in a certain ideology at this moment. Mm-hmm. Is that the case that we should have an interpretation of his words?
Yes, a little bit. So he shouldn't be taken too literally. For example, when he's talking about oppressors and those who are oppressed, we read it through the lenses of, kind of dictatorship almost. And we think, well, that's why it does not apply on us. But reading closely, you will see that he's talking about powerful and powerless. The groups in the society that has more power and they use and misuse this power, and those who are powerless, who do not take part in the social processes, especially not in the decision-making. And of course, it can easily apply even on a modern Latin America, Asia, Africa, but also in Europe. We do talk about crisis of democracy in Europe, and we do talk of people who do not take part in the decision-making. We even talk about crisis of democracy, people who are powerless in those terms, like not they are starving. Well, I'm not saying that there are no people in Europe that are starving, and this is additional problem, but let's focus on this interpretation of oppressors and those who are oppressed now. So this powerful and powerless is still something that has its roots in the thoughts of Paulo Freire. So if you read it through those lenses, people who do not have enough either resources or enough education or understanding of situation to take part in a decision-making, in a political processes, in civic engagement, and so on, they are oppressed in a certain way. And then we can easily apply those ideas of Paulo Freire. How can literacy and education help those people to understand the world they live in, to understand better those power relationships, and then how they can change it and how they can become more active? So just to put it in this global frame of political and ideological context, then we can see that we still can talk about it, being it using the words oppressors or powerful and those who are not taking part in the processes, but still the paradigm is there, and I think it's more powerful than ever. Or you can also think in terms of economic system we live in. And, consumerism and dominance of profit-oriented way of thinking and free market. Well, if it's really free, this is also another question. We know that neoliberalism neoliberal economy brought some forms of not really free market regulation, but also driven by other paradigms. So this is also something that we are being manipulated by. And this is also a sort of oppression that we need to think about, and we need to understand how it works and what can we as citizens or consumers do about it. Okay. So there is still some space to think about it.
So there are many angles of Paulo Freire. Let's say, like he said that education by definition is also a political system, and that we should be aware of that also. But also, I understand also that it's a matter of epistemology, no? The vocabulary we are using, and to be more conscious, like the examples you are giving, in what kind of system we are living, how do we name it? So it's a little bit, quite current in these current times. We can use these ideas to make the analysis of the current system we are living in.
You're absolutely right, and it's really good that you use the word epistemology. It's partly also because of vocabulary that creates a kind of consciousness and creates our paradigms, and also the epistemological approach we have. And very important that Paulo Freire said, and we know it also from the critical theory, education is never neutral. Mm-hmm. And education is always political in terms of now we can even move from vocabulary of oppressing, because he also said that it serves either conformity or freedom. And I think in modern Europe, we can recognize quite a lot of that, this conformity, this adaptation, this insisting on accommodation to the new circumstances. Now, talking about education, the vocabulary that we are used to is that education should help people to cope with the changes, to adapt to the changes, to follow the fast changes in technology. You see how easily we accepted this vocabulary. We should follow the changes, not initiate them, not guide them, not create the changes we want and the world we want. No, we are following the changes. We are adapting to the new world. Like, new world is coming out of the blue. Someone there created those changes, and we are not questioning evermore. So who is creating the changes and why? And are we happy with them or not? No, education is helping us to cope with the changes, to adapt to new world. And then the technology comes to this picture. And then, of course, technological changes are just like given, like that. There is nothing we can do about it. Let's just help people through education to adapt to the situation and to simply follow, not to lead, not to transform, not to participate in those changes. So even through that vocabulary that we see that in a way we are oppressed by the changes that are imposed where we did not take actively part or critically question them.
Okay, interesting. You mentioned also these technological changes, and this year or last year with COVID, we were confronted with the incapacity of communicating, or the possibility by Zoom. Also, our school education was using this kind of systems, but also many factories and the work in general is more digital. We are living in a more digital situation. So the critical approach of digital evolution, let's say. Yeah. I would like to know what you are thinking about that, especially in education. Is it only a matter of a Zoom session and then we have a perfect alternative for education?
Well, that's, of course, a hot topic. And it's not very popular way of thinking to criticize it now, because that's the way how we can communicate now. And I'm not denying the importance and the power of ICT and the digital technology in education. And we should use it as much as we can. But the big but is coming back to Paulo Freire. Until COVID, there wasn't a single event or project on literacy not mentioning the definition or the quote of Paulo Freire that literacy is about reading the world and not reading the word. Suddenly it disappeared. It disappeared because we have digital technology, and reading the world is, of course, possible, but it's even more complicated. Yeah. And reading the world requires critical approach, requires critical thinking, requires taking people maybe out of the comfort zone. And that's not what you can easily do through all the Zooms and Skypes and MS Teams and so on. And I see a very strong tendency in international organizations, international policy making, to replace many of forms of learning and education with the online formats. Of course, it was caused by COVID-19, and we had to accept it, and we were glad that there were some means to help us to bridge this gap that COVID-19 causes. But that's absolutely not a silver bullet and solution for all the points, especially not for this critical thinking. All these digital technologies and Zooms are great for, having the meetings. We realize that we don't have to travel half of the world to have a short meeting. Lovely, great. Also because of the, pollution and environmental issues. Then we can have the meetings, we can transfer some information, inspire some thinking, have certain things. But when it comes to critical consciousness, developing critical consciousness, when it comes to develop, let's say, for example, intercultural learning. And I don't mean transferring information about intercultural learning. I mean about, changing attitudes, going deep under their skin, touching the emotion of the people. And we know it's necessary for intercultural learning, for critical thinking, and so on. How can you do it via digital technology? Very difficult. So we should not make a myth of powerful digital technology that solves all the problems. And there is a strong tendency. And not only the tendency, I have to mention that I know it through ICAE and through our work that there were, even before COVID, many projects and attempts, some of them supported, for example, by the World Bank, to replace teachers with computers, laptops, applications, online platforms, and so on. In some African countries, there were already projects where teachers were replaced by the laptops, or maybe they were only serving to transfer or to work through the program to apply an online program, an application to the students. And the idea was, well, it's much easier and we can replace all the teacher. It's cheaper and, they have all the same quality. Oh, really? So, good old teachers, well, it's obsolete. It's past. Now we go for modern technology. So that happened before COVID-19. Talking countries like Liberia in Africa and so on. So, and of course, COVID-19 gave even more power and reasons to this way of thinking. And the danger is there. There is no single research not proving, from this field, not proving the teacher is the main cause or one of the main factors for the success in learning, especially in adult education, or for the lack of a success, depending on how good or bad. So we still have to focus on teachers. And of course, digital technology comes as addition. And this is a tool, but we should not replace the goal with the tool. It's still the tool, a powerful tool that we can use, but it's not the goal. And the good old pedagogical and andragogical questions remain. So what is the content that we are teaching? How do I give a feedback? How do I evaluate the work? How do I include the participants more actively? Especially in online world, that's not easy. Having a few groups, small groups in Zoom is not it's not an answer to this problem. How do I engage them? How do I inspire critical thinking? How do I take people out of the comfort zone? Sorry, I know it's not, a mainstream thinking, but I still believe people have to be taken out from the comfort zone from time to time.
In order to learn in a more active way. Yeah.
In this zone, the learning happens. If you keep them, if you keep students and learners, just like if you treat them as customers, we need to make them satisfied and happy. They will never learn. There is no growth in that. And I see that neoliberal approach is bringing this to the universities, but also to adult education. Let's keep them satisfied and happy. I can only imagine what Paulo Freire would say on that, with his attempt to open the eyes of the people, critical consciousness, make them understand the brutal world around them, but make them understand. Now we are not trying to make people understand the world, but understand the computer and the application and the online platform and how the Moodle works, and and where do I find sources about this and that. This is a good starting point, but this is only the starting point.
Okay, so it means that also in adult education we should have this point of attention on how we are learning, because it reminds me that even after COVID and this health crisis, let's say, that the lessons learned are not coming. Also with the climate crisis, as a society, it seems to be very difficult to learn, really. Is that a big challenge probably, but how should we do that? And what is the role of civil society in that?
Well, the problem is that we identify learning with a collection of information.
Yeah, the banking concept also. Yeah,
again, the digital technology is helping us to do this, but then we do not go on further. We do not check what are we doing with the information that are so easily available now. And I think the role of education should be more and more not to collect the information because you have, Google.
Plenty.
2 clicks and you find the information. But how to estimate the information, how to evaluate it? Critical approach to this information collection of information. What are they for? Who is sending or creating, the world of information? What are we going to do without that? That's what civil society is trying to do in many of our activities and projects. But I have to say that the danger is there for for civil society also. We are also more and more driven by donors' agendas and by, of course, interest of survival. So what we have both, and this is something that relates to or answers partly your question about learning and what type of learning. I think more and more it should be transformative learning and not this adaptive one. But look at the vocabulary, and we mentioned already vocabulary. It is saying a lot about our concepts and about the whole background, ideological and political, that those vocabulary and concepts are coming from. In Europe, we are talking about skills and competencies.
Exactly.
We talk about skilling and upskilling and reskilling. European agendas and all those policy papers that are created by Brussels and European Commission and the DG for Education and Employment. So adult education is not with education and culture anymore. Adult education joined or was moved to the Department for Employment. So we talk about education for employment, labor market, not even employment, employability. What is the difference? Well, it's your fault if you're not employable, Yeah. So you're an adult, you should learn and make yourself employable because jobs are everywhere. So it's your fault if you don't have enough skills and competencies or entrepreneurial spirit and so on. So it's skilling and upskilling and reskilling and competencies everywhere. Knowledge, learning, wisdom, no. So we are not using these terms even more. So I think this is an indicator how in Europe we have accepted this neoliberal agenda of education serving the needs of a labor market and serving, as I said, not even employment, but employability and the world of industry and consumerism and so on. Not so much personal development, not so much social inclusion, transformative learning, and so on. I would say Europe was following this double agenda or double function for quite a long time. If you analyze European documents on education from the last, let's say, 20 years, you will find both, there is employment and there is social inclusion. Personal development, social development. So Europe was standing on 2 feet and was trying to balance that. But I think it's quite lost in the last, decade or so. And now it's more and more skilling and employment and so on, and less this transformative learning. And again, going back to Paulo Freire and the parallel or the need for Paulo Freire way of thinking today, that's exactly where I see the need. You need this critical thinking and you need this transformative learning in order to change the world. Unless we think the world is perfect, or at least in Europe. And we do not have serious problems. And more or less, things are fine. We just need to adapt a little bit, fine tune a little bit. Well, we know that's not the case.
Okay.
We have one crisis after the other. We are still suffering from some consequences of a financial crisis. Environmental crisis became, continuous one. Now we have a health crisis. There was migrant crisis and so on. And we are still adapting, running after those changes and running after the crisis and see how we can mild the consequences. Mm-hmm. That's also what adult education is doing. And not saying, okay, let's see, where does it come from? If you would allow me, I would give an example.
Yes, of course.
In some of the European countries working with our partners and members, they were providing great work with migrants, especially when this wave was really strong a few years ago. And I think it's great, of course, and it's great that we had adult education organizations that could provide some certain kind of a help with the recognition of the prior learning, with additional courses, language, vocational courses, integration, and so on. But what I was missing, and again, this is, I believe, quite Freirean way of thinking, is understanding why is it happening? Why do we have a migrant wave? Where do they come from? And then, critical question, the most important question. What have we done in Europe? What have our governments done, or what they have missed to do in Asia, Middle East, Africa, and so on, to cause this migrant wave?
The reasons, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Of course, I'm talking about, it could be weapon or military interventions and these kind of things. So now we're dealing with Afghanistan, and of course, we are expecting the wave of migrants or not. I mean, the borders are stopped quite a lot. But the ways, what have our governments been doing in Afghanistan for 20 years? Mm-hmm. And there is one of the answers is that the amount, I don't have it for Europe, I have a few amounts for single countries, but it's not so important to name the amounts. The amount of the money invested in military, in weapons, was much, much higher than developing democracy in a political system in Afghanistan. So no wonder that what's happening now.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't wonder if migrants are coming or similar things are happening. So that's what I would say critical thinking is about. And that's what we miss in education in Europe. I mean, education has this double function, of course, helping people in a concrete situation, but also helping people to understand why is it happening and what should we do so those things are not happening again. I mean, not migration, there always will be migration, but not willing migrations, forced migrations, and these kind of things.
So as a conclusion, but we knew it already, I think there are many angles of his philosophy and his points of view that we can use. It's a matter of attitude also, and of applying this education in a more holistic way, let's say, more transformative and more analyzing in a global way, which we could learn as a lesson, let's say.
Yeah, sure. And there are plenty of such points in his thought, in his theory and method that we could see from that point of view. For example, the famous banking education model. We do analyze, especially in academia, researchers, we do analyze this model, we explain it. Banking model of education, like people, like in the bank, people are collecting information, and so it's they treat education as commodity. So isn't what we are still doing today? Isn't all this, skilling and upskilling, collecting the skills and adding the competencies? Isn't it a banking model?
Yeah, exactly.
As a matter of fact. So, just a small shift from the language and you will see that the problem is still the same.
Yeah.
Or, talking about the banks, so we did have this global financial crisis, but the banks and the current banking system, they're still dominating the world, especially the developed world in different way, also the developing countries, but Europe and so on. the banks are, well, not ruling the world, but still taking a big part of this position in the ruling system. So even criticizing that, this kind of oppression that is imposed on us by banking system would be, again, in a spirit of using Paulo Freire, but not in a doctrinary way, not in a like, okay, repeating it and sticking to it, but really through the real spirit of Freire.
Applying to our own context.
Understanding of our own world, of our own oppressions, our own limits, needs for critical thoughts, need for true transformation. Literacy, for example, also, I mean, usually Paulo Freire is treated as very often as someone whose work is focused on literacy, and like, oh, in Europe, we do not have the problem. Where several years ago, there was this study, PIAC study done by OECD, and we realized that there are millions of illiterate people in Europe even.
Exactly.
And it's not only about, oh, they need, to learn to how to surf and to write an email and so on. It's much more. So how was it possible?
Exactly.
In Europe, I mean, the most developed part of the world, how is it possible that we have millions of literate people? And what should we do about that? So those two questions where Freire could be very, very useful now. So what should be offered to those people and how they could be personally engaged, not only offered, but also engaged in the process? And what happened to Europe so that this awful fact with millions of illiterate people is that happens? So what should be done about it?
Okay. Maybe my final question. I understood that the 8th of September was the day of literacy of UNESCO. You were not so happy with the approach, let's say, or the fact that even Paulo Freire was not mentioned.
Yes,
but not only that.
Of course, I said I'm against this doctrinary approaching or using his quotes and so on, but it's... when we mention it's also kind of a symbol or a message or indicator that we are still committed to transformative power of literacy. Mm-hmm. So the fact that he wasn't really mentioned, I took it as an indicator that we are leaving this position, and I think it's dangerous if literacy is not treating from the point of view of its transformative power, but only adaptive one. But this year's International Literacy Day was committed and devoted to the digital transformation and online learning and online literacy. And it was very much technical. And what I saw as the most worrisome tendency is that right to education and right to literacy, which is one of the really basic human rights, and I hope we all agree about that, it was not mentioned. We are talking now in these spaces, people were talking about right to connectivity. Mm-hmm. So what you need is a good computer, is a good Wi-Fi, and well, the rest you will do alone. I mean, if you have good platform and application and you have digital skills, well, you will find it. And of course, the fact that half of the world is not online, approximately half of the world is not online, not using, digital tools and so on, was interpreted as a call for action to supply those people with the connectivity and with the computers. And of course, the main question is, why is the half of the world not online? What are they missing? Because we know that they are also missing, food and water and health services and so on. So no, let's supply them with the computers and the good connectivity, and the problem will be solved. And I'm really worried that the discussion on literacy is going to this direction. And we know now, I'm talking as a researcher, that alphabetization and literacy is a very tricky process. You cannot achieve it easily, and it requires a lot of interaction, a lot of methods. Paulo Freire developed, I mean, not him personally only, but also the people working with him, the famous reflect method, which means that participants are creating the materials. They are actively engaged in their own literacy learning. So if we do it online, how are we going to do it? How are we going to replace this? Is there a meaningful replacement in literacy? So as a researcher, as adult educator, practitioner also, I'm wondering, there was no answer. There were no answers to that. So all the discussion and answer are stopped at that point. Last year, International Literacy Day, I saw it, and you wouldn't believe it. There was a company invited by UNESCO last year, a company from US, and they promised a program. They will solve the problem in 3 minutes. There was a big slide, missing skills, digital literacy skills. So there are digital solutions solving the problem in 3 minutes. And I was like, promise me 3 days, 3 months. I would say not possible. 3 minutes. Well, maybe some new neurological solutions. I don't believe it, of course. So it's the promotion of the digital agenda and the digital approach and so on. I'm really worried. And I think we in adult education, wherever we are, so being it civil society or academia or practitioners, should give our contribution to that and say, yeah, that's possible to do it in a digital format, and let's go for it. And let's improve this. It's not only about connectivity. It's the whole pedagogy and methodology of how it could be done. And it's still lacking. And on the other hand, we should also say there are certain things where digitalization is not an answer to a problem. So we need to, we cannot ignore that, and we need to give our contribution to that. We all.
Okay, thank you very much for taking us through the thoughts of Paulo Freire, but especially bridging it to today's context and society and the challenges we have in the educational field. So thank you very much.
It was really a pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation.